Ladies and gentlemen, fellas out there, let's close up the week with that one dude. We're looking at 5 leverage plays. That one dude. We're getting a couple of players from a couple different positions. Every single position but quarterback, and a 1% owned flyer who might be dealing with injury, so we'll have to track that. But 5 players. Leverage plays. It's the name of the game. If you watch the Final Thoughts video this week, it's probably the best Final Thoughts video we have done all year and probably the best one we have ever done. So be sure to check that out in terms of being very in-depth at every single position on specifically the contest you're playing and exactly how to attack those contests depending on how many people are in them, depending on if it's single entry, whatever it might be, and the leverage plays for those contests. So it is very informative. And we touched on some of those players because it was so detailed that we're going to talk about today as well. And it's going to be a grand old time. So I appreciate you all being here in advance. Sit down, relax. It's Saturday, it's Sunday, whenever you're watching this. Get ready for the schmacks. And all I ask from you before we start this bad boy up is ratethispodcast.com/Sal. We have broken into the top 25. We are hoping to break into the top 20 and try and punch up the little man towards the ESPNs and the CBSs and the PFFs and all the big enterprises out there. This little engine that could. So I appreciate you all in advance. You get entered into a chance to win a $100 raffle that I will be pulling on Sunday. So ratethispodcast.com/Sal. Appreciate you all in advance. Let's slide into the first player now for that one dude. So the first player is somebody I've been liking all week. I've already taken his props in other videos. We've been hyping him up, but this man, this is how we the little engine that could. Even after saying that we like this man a good amount, still coming in as of this recording at 5% projected ownership. We go to Cincinnati. We go to Jamar Chase, $70,000, no, $7,000 Jamar Chase at 17.2 fantasy points this week. 5% ownership, looking like a snack, looking like a lovely leverage play. So for starters, his team total is great at 27 team implied total. The matchup itself, like as an entire unit, the secondary for the Chargers has been solid. Individually, though, I mean, Chris Harris is in the slot. Jamar Chase will be there sometimes, but not really, maybe like 10% of the time. On the outside, it's honestly going to be a solid matchup for him. I mean, he's going to get Michael Davis on the one side, who is, as of right now, a bottom 5 graded player on this slate at the cornerback position, according to Pro Football Focus, and Jamar Chase is going to have a massive speed advantage on him. Michael Davis has not been good this year. And then you have Campbell on the opposite side on the outside, where Jamar Chase will doing most of his damage just on the outside, right, not in the slot. He's allowing a 75% catch percentage this year, and based on watching film, Jamar Chase should get some pretty nice free releases off of him a couple times per game, which opens up those big plays. So the matchup itself, the game environment is looking nice. The reason why he's not owned is because he hasn't been producing for people lately, and his price tag is still staying relatively high at $7,000, whereas T. Higgins is still cheap on his own team. So if people are looking at this game and they're saying, hey, I don't really care about ownership because I don't know about ownership, and a lot of people don't understand leverage still, and even if they do, they don't emotionally understand it to the point where they can pull the trigger on plays that might not look as good because their favorite content creator didn't hype them up. But T. Higgins for $1,200 less, and T. Higgins was just coming off of a massive game, and T. Higgins has been getting good volume all year. Why would I play Jamar Chase? And that's the reason why you're getting Jamar Chase at a low price point. And let me tell you why you would play Jamar Chase. Because he's at a low price point. And when he goes for these ceiling games, as he has multiple times this year, of 30-plus points multiple times this year, that is when his 5% projected ownership. In smaller field tournaments, if he comes in at 3%, that is when that starts to easily dominate the slate for you. So his total season numbers so far, you know the rookie started off hot. He had 5 touchdowns in his first 5 games. That's why he got to this price tag in the $7,000 range, and he was early on the Offensive Rookie of the Year nominee. I think that should be pretty easily at this point Mac Jones, but if you keep going down, the next 6 games, only 3 touchdowns. So the touchdowns start to wear off, and the flair, if you will, the sex appeal of Jamar Chase starts to lower, and you get these low ownership numbers because the price tag isn't coming down with it. And it hit an all-time low. I mean, Jamar Chase has 13 or more Draftkings points in 9 out of 11 games, 82% of his games this year. At $7,000, you need more than 13 points. Although, in like the worst-case scenario, that's not terrible. So in 9 out of 11 games, 82% he's going for 13 or more fantasy points. So it's not awful. His floor is not terrible. It's just because the recency bias, week 12 against a division rival in Pittsburgh, you saw just 3 catches for like 30 yards on 3 targets. I mean, they barely threw the ball in that game in general, right? You're running the ball nonstop and mixing 30-plus times. He only ran 24 routes, his second lowest on the season, because they were just running. But if people were to look at just the previous 4 games before that, he actually had the highest target share that he's ever had through a 4-game span, and really any span this year, with 38 targets, 9.5 targets per game, 5 red zone targets led to 2 touchdowns during that 4-game stretch. So the usage is still heavily there. His volume has actually been picking up, right? It's weird. He had lower volume beginning of the year, was scoring touchdowns. That's just variance. That's just freakiness, right? That's just random shit. And then later in the year, he's getting more volume, but the touchdowns are dropping. It's going to balance out to where he's going to have some pretty damn good volume, and he's going to score some touchdowns. And I'd like that to happen. I'd like to own that player when he's 5 or 3% owned, like he likely will be this week, as opposed to, and you can see right here, as opposed to Desean Jackson this week, who Desean Jackson is coming in as the next receiver in the pricing at $6,800. So he's a little bit cheaper here. I love Desean Jackson. I think he's a fantastic play, but there's actually something to talk about here. 17.5 fantasy point projection on Desean Jackson, who by all accounts probably has a worse quarterback, right? We can get that out of the way. But regardless of that, should still see the target share. So 17.5 fantasy points for him. I got Jamar Chase at 17.2. They're basically the same price. They have the same projection. Jamar Chase coming in at 5% projected ownership. Desean Jackson 12%. How does that happen? Recency bias. How many targets have you been getting me in each of these games, right? Desean Jackson, have you been hitting mega ceilings? Not really. You're just consistently going out there and getting your 15 to 20 fantasy points. So people like that consistency of having solid performances rather than the upside opportunities, even though Jamar Chase, we just told you, 82% of his games this year, 9 of 11, have gone for at least 13 fantasy points. That's pretty damn consistent to me. So we like Jamar Chase a whole lot this week as a leverage play, and we take the over 59.5 receiving yards. We've said it a couple times this week. I still like it. I've taken it like 3 times. It's on the screen right now. Over 59.5 receiving yards on Jamar Chase on prizepicks.com. You go to prizepicks.com. Hey, fella, here's a little bonus for you lady out there. 59.5 receiving yards. You take the over that. If you put the code SALON when you sign up, right, your first bet is free up to $100. Free up to $100. So be sure to check that out. They'll give you a nice little bonus bet there for you beautiful people if you use that code SAL. So next up, let's transition now to a position that we don't talk about too often lately on this show because there hasn't been like any screaming obvious plays. And this week, there's maybe 2 or 3 screaming obvious GPP plays depending on how you build your lineup out at the tight end position and where there's leverage. And usually you're not going to find the highest price tight end being like the best tight end play in terms of leverage. Usually that guy, he's going to be like 15% owned. He's a fine play, but the ownership is there. Do what you got to do. You could probably avoid it because he's expensive. And on a week like this week, week 13, you're seeing 2 solid punt tight end plays. James O'Shaughnessy, Foster Moreau. We covered those guys. I think James O'Shaughnessy makes more sense at a lower ownership. Foster Moreau, 1 performance, 6 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown versus the Eagles earlier this year is making everybody think that he's like the second coming of Ron Gronkowski or something when he's just Foster Moreau. But besides the point, it's not either of those guys. The reason I mention those guys is because they're lower owned. They're soaking up a lot of ownership this week naturally. You're going to get Gronk in the mid-range who's been balling out a 100-yard game. He looks fantastic. He looks spry. He is taking advantage of all these short passes. There's still no Antonio Brown out there. Gronk is 5,300. Some ownership and a good amount of it is going there. So we get a man up top. So the position itself is getting some ownership dumps, and the team itself is getting different ownership dumps for San Francisco and George Kittle. George Kittle is by far the best tight end play on the slate this week. Now, that does not mean Sal said he's the best tight end in the play. I have to go jam him into all my lineups. No, because the second or third best tight end play in the slate is going to be cheaper than George Kittle because George Kittle is the most expensive. So it does come down to, can you actually fit this guy into your lineup around your stacks? But if you're asking me for the best GPP play on the slate at the tight end position, it is George Kittle. You have to try and afford it and kind of build your lineup to an extent around him, but it is. 16.2 point projection is my highest projected tight end by about 3 fantasy points, so just projection-wise, he's the best play. And then you look at it, and as of this recording, I have him for 7% projected ownership at $5,900. I mean, if I was to compare George Kittle to like the $5,900 wide receivers right now, his projection is pretty much in line with Hunter Renfro's. It's more than T. Higgins. It's more than Michael Pittman's. It's more than Brandon Cooks. It's more than Devonta Smith's. It's more than all those guys there. So, I mean, he's basically better than the 5K range of the wide receiver position, and he's still coming in lower owned than a lot of those guys as well. His team has a 24-team implied total, a matchup against the putrid 27th ranked Seattle secondary, where George Kittle, if you're talking about tight end matchups, has the number 3 tight end matchup on the week against the Seattle linebackers. Those Seattle linebackers allow 90% of the passes thrown their way in coverage to be caught. 90%, 9 out of 10. That's good for George Kittle. And they allow 1.91 yards per cover out, the highest on the week and the highest in the NFL. That's good for George Kittle, a man who can break yards after the catch, who, even though he's missed games this year, still ranks right now yards after the catch 3rd with 226 for tight ends. Crazy. So people here, in the performances on George Kittle, he's been solid. He just had 1 bad game last game because, again, they ran the ball fucking 30-plus times. But people are going to focus on Elijah Mitchell this week. I like Elijah Mitchell. We've talked about Elijah Mitchell. He's a solid play. He's going to be like 15% owned for good reason. He's $6,000 coming off of back-to-back weeks of 30-plus opportunities, basically. So when everybody goes to Elijah Mitchell at 15% owned, the people that are going to play a San Francisco 49ers player, they're going to go to Elijah Mitchell, and rarely will you ever see somebody say, oh, I want to play Elijah Mitchell and this tight end. I want to play the guy who survives off of getting a lot of volume and George Kittle, who would actually go to not playing as well if Elijah Mitchell got 30 carries, right? Less opportunities for the passing game. The game is slower because they're running so much. So you're not going to see those people play that. And they probably shouldn't play it together, but it's going to lead to naturally George Kittle being lower owned, which is a funny thing because Deebo Samuel is out. And because Deebo Samuel got these running back touches and has scored a rushing touchdown in 3 straight weeks, people are so gung-ho that Deebo Samuel being out helps Elijah Mitchell the most. Even though Elijah Mitchell has been seeing 27 opportunities on the ground in back-to-back games and some targets, right? It's going to help Brandon Ayuk pretty clearly. And yes, George Kittle, especially George Kittle in the middle of the field, but Jimmy Garoppolo is so comfortable throwing. So Kittle is coming off of that week 12 dud where he had 2 targets and he had a catch for 13 yards. And this is very similar to the what have you done for me lately Jamar Chase crowd. Jamar Chase, before week 12, in 9 out of 10 games, was going for 13 or more fantasy points. Consistent as they come with ceiling performances. George Kittle, before last week, had 23.1, 16, and 13.5 fantasy points before his return from injury. What you're looking at right there is basically like 17.5 to 18 fantasy points per game on average. That is pretty damn good. He's had a red zone target in about 4 straight games. It's just that last performance that people are looking at, even though now the target share is bound to go up, and the matchup probably couldn't get any better for Mr. George Kittle. I mean, on the season, you're still seeing a 23.5% target share, a 27% target rate. Like, these numbers rank top 5 and top 4 amongst tight ends still. He's still elite and efficient at 2.28 yards per route run. And efficiency metrics for pass catchers, that's 4th in the NFL for tight ends. He's still top 5 in every statistical category. Now the volume is likely to come. We love it. We can compare George Kittle to the only guy you can really compare him to in the price range. There's 2 guys. There's Kyle Pitts, but nobody wants to own Kyle Pitts all that much because of recent performances. But Rob Gronkowski. Again, I like Rob Gronkowski. If you're playing Brady stats, I probably want to prioritize getting Rob Gronkowski in those. But Rob Gronkowski is 5,300, a 13.5 fantasy point projection. So I've got George Kittle for like 3 more fantasy points. Rob Gronkowski is coming in at 10 to 12% owned. So close to, not exactly, but close to double the ownership as Kittle, even though Kittle projects out for more, even though Kittle is only $600 more. You might be able to find that just from going down to defense. So George Kittle this week is going to look like a strong play. Now I'm waiting for the bets right now. I was told that as of Friday, or Friday afternoon, I'm recording this Friday morning because I'm going to be traveling into the weekend. But I was told that George Kittle is going to be seeing some sort of props on Prize Picks, and I'm going to double check right now live, but they're not there. Just know that I want the overs on those props, right? Just know that I want the overs on those props. I have him for 16.2 fantasy points, so if they put up his fantasy point number in like the 13s or something, take the over on those props. Again, you find those on prizepicks.com. Use the code SAL, get a free bet of $200. So if the yardage numbers are somewhere in like the 40s or 50s, take the overs. If the fantasy points are somewhere below, 14, 13, 12, somewhere in there, take the overs. So that will help you with that. Now we have 3 players left, a 1% owned player, another receiver, and another running back. And let's now transition into the running back. And if you're wondering where I'm getting ownership numbers, the projection numbers, all that type of stuff, all the analysis, all these tools, it's going to be down below on my Patreon. It's just me. I'm just a one-man band here. So if you would like to join the community, if you, the beautiful person out there, would like to increase your DFS game, take down the Dollarooskies, join a community of 1,000+ members, thriving and having a lovely time in the Discord, not only in the NFL, but the NBA, the PGA, the MMA, a lot of stuff going on there. Optimizers, industry low prices, ownership, projections, game by game notes, rankings, all this stuff. Come on in. There's a lot there. There's a mouthful there for you. We'll welcome you and say welcome home, welcome to the family. Come on in, increase your game, and win some money. Why would you not want to win some money? So we go to the running back position now. There's not a lot of great, let's say, lower owned leverage plays. Like the leverage plays are going to be guys who are like 12 to 15% owned that should be 25 to 30% owned, i.e. Alexander Madison, i.e. Jamal Williams. These are high owned players that are probably not high owned enough. Now there's one player who's actually coming in with low ownership and does become a leverage play for us. And that man is in the $5,000 range. He would be a massive pivot off of Jamal Williams, although again, I still like Jamal Williams. But a man we liked last week, and he was owned in like 15% of contests, so people are going to be lower on him, is their Eagles running back Miles Sanders, who is expected to play. Dealt with an injury, left at halftime, dealt with an injury, but he's already expected to play, practice on Thursday. And I know the first thought that goes into people's heads, I'm not playing Miles Sanders. That guy got me 7.4 fantasy points last week, and I played him, blah, 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 blah. A lot of people, I guess it wasn't widely reported, Miles Sanders last week got injured basically at half. He didn't play like the entire second half. Miles Sanders in his first game back from injury 2 weeks ago played 45% of the snaps, right? And that was in a blowout where they kind of limited him. And then last week he played 29%. So he was clearly hurt. He was going to play somewhere around 60+% of the snaps in that game if he was healthy, based on playing 29% in like the first half. So Miles Sanders at 5,200, I have for 4% projected ownership. I have him for 13.2 fantasy points. And here's the thing. He has the number 1 pass blocking advantage of the entire week, the number 1 that the Eagles have seen all season long. And this is an offensive line that is just dominating people, bullying people in the run offense. A positive 83% advantage, ranks number 1 on the week versus the dead last ranked New York Jets run defense. And oh yeah, the Eagles over the last 5 weeks have been the number 1 rush offense. They've been number 1 in run plays per game. Their run offensive line has been number 1 in the NFL. So you get the number 1 offensive line in the NFL versus a dead last run defense, as the Eagles are a very rare 26-point team total that high, and a very rare the Eagles, this team, a 7-point favorite. So everything looks great for Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders, who just last week was looking great behind this offensive line. He had 9 carries for 64 yards. He added a reception, right? But his 9 carries for 64 yards in basically the first half. This man was averaging over 7 yards per clip. He was on pace easily for 100 plus yards. He only played 30% of the snaps and probably would have gone on to play right around 60% in that game. And you get some other benefits here. Jordan Howard is not trending in the right direction. Kenneth Gainwell was really not all that much involved even when he was active. And yes, Boston Scott was heavily involved. He fumbled. He scored a touchdown last week, but that was a lot in the second half when Miles Sanders was hurt. When Miles Sanders was fully healthy, which he was trying to get ramped back up to last week, and now that's not the case, but when he was fully healthy, he was also seeing passing game work. 4 and 5 target games. He saw 9 targets in those 2 final weeks before his injury. He had, in his first 6 games of the season before getting hurt, 9 red zone attempts in 6 games. That's solid with a mobile quarterback being in your backfield. That's very solid. So we like Miles Sanders, and there's a very easy comparison here for Miles Sanders. People in large field tournaments, people in tournaments everywhere are going to jump on the Antonio Gibson train. They saw him in prime time. J.D. McKissic got hurt with a neck injury and was carted off, although it's not supposed to be significant, but likely won't play this week. We'll track that. But Antonio Gibson at $5,700, $500 more than Mr. Miles Sanders, I have for 13.5 fantasy points. I have these guys for the exact same projection, basically. Miles Sanders is $500 cheaper, and I have Antonio Gibson coming in currently with 12% ownership to Miles Sanders 4%. The reason why people want to play Antonio Gibson more is because they think that he's just all of a sudden going to take on all the J.D. McKissic passing down snaps. They think that they saw him on prime time looking nice and that they want that to happen to them as well. That's fine. Antonio Gibson can go out there and score 16 points, right? It would be a little bit above my projection, but so can Miles Sanders. They're in very similar situations here. Miles Sanders is actually in a better situation as a better pass catching running back, as a faster running back, as a all around better game scenario here, as a touchdown favorite and a much easier matchup. So we'll take Miles Sanders there in the comparison. We'll take Miles Sanders over 62.5 rushing yards as it slides up onto the screen on prizepicks.com. Free bet up to $100. You have a couple options now to pair it with. 62.5 Miles Sanders, free bet, use the code SAL. So now we have a wide receiver left and a 1% owned play. The wide receiver that we have left is $6,000 flat, which I think gives it all the way away. There's only one guy there. Yes, the Pittsburgh Steelers own Chase Claypool, 13.2 fantasy point projection at 4% projected ownership. 21-point team total isn't great, but that's kind of where the Steelers have been all season long for the most part. And let's discuss Chase Claypool. I mean, the reason he's on this video, the reason we're discussing him is because he's a leverage play. What does a leverage play mean? He has a nice projection, he has a good ceiling, and he's low owned. He is 4% owned. And he has a nice matchup. Matchup against Baltimore's number 23 secondary. I mean, look, Chase Claypool, he's not going to see a shadow matchup against Marlon Humphrey or anything like that. Chase Claypool moves all around the field. 36% of the time on the left side, 21% of the time in the slot, and 41% or 43% of the time, that adds up to 100, on the right side, according to Pro Football Focus, the PFFs, the puffs. So Humphrey earlier this year, everybody saw him get lit up by Jamar Chase for Jamar Chase's big game, but overall he's been solid. Only a 53% catch rate so far this year. On the opposite side, there's Everett. So Everett's on the opposite side, who is very undersized. I mean, one of the smallest cornerbacks in the league at 178 pounds. That's not going to bode well for a man in Chase Claypool who weighs 240 pounds at 6'4" and runs a top 3 percentile 40 time. So Chase Claypool, built in, before the skill sets even come in on how you can coverage and cover techniques and things like that, has a 50-pound advantage on Everett when he's out there, and Everett, whatever you want to say this last man's name is, right? That is a lovely spot, as obvious. I mean, think about you playing flag football. You got a 170-pounder there. You're a monster 220-pound, just monster stone muscle NFL receiver who's very fast and physical. You think that that's not going to be easy for jump balls, especially in the red zone, where Chase Claypool now has 11 red zone targets in his last 6 games, which is up there with top 5 in the NFL, where Chase Claypool has been a top 10 wide receiver in overall opportunities and usage the last 2 weeks with 80 routes run, 17 targets, 91%, and in the last game finally got there. 100% of the snaps, has not been leaving the field, not only in 3 wide receiver sets, but not leaving the field in 2 wide receiver sets or 1 wide receiver set. He is now staying on the field. If they put 1 wide receiver out there with a jumbo formation, it is not Deontay Johnson no more. It's not James Washington. It is now Chase Claypool as of the last 2 weeks, which opens him up the opportunities for play action jump balls and things like that. So yes, this is a lovely matchup. Baltimore secondary in general is undersized. Tavon Austin, slot cornerbacks are usually smaller, 185 pounds. Averett, 178 pounds. And you get Humphreys around 192, 195 pounds. So nice matchups everywhere here. You do have his 17 deep targets this year for Claypool being top 10 in the NFL. The problem is that Big Ben ranks 29th in deep completion percentage. And therein lies the entire problem for this team, the completion percentage issue. Pittsburgh ranks number 4 in passes per game right now. So what you're getting here is a lower owned freak athlete and a good matchup, not only just skill-wise, but also he's going to see the red zone targets. He's getting the volume now. He's not leaving the field, so even more opportunities are to come, especially if Big Ben has to throw towards his 40 times per game that he has been throwing. So we like to see that. We like to see the red zone opportunities as well continuing to be there. I mean, for comparison reasons, Brandon Cooks, we all like Brandon Cooks. He's not going to be insanely highly owned this week, but Brandon Cooks currently coming in $100 less, right? That discounted idea that I have in my NFL fantasy course, daily fantasy course, 10 hours of video, bunch of stuff there. You can check it out down below if you want to. But yeah, Brandon Cooks $100 less. People think it's a massive discount. Brandon Cooks, $100 less, 14 fantasy point projection, so like a point more, double the ownership at 8% projected owned, and that might come up if anything. So we do like to see that. There's now currently any bets out there on Chase Claypool in fantasy. I don't like the Big Ben props, so I guess we're not going to have any props for Chase Claypool as of now. I'll be interested in seeing his fantasy point numbers that they put out there. I have him for 13.5. If they drop like a 10 or an 11 out there, I would definitely bite at that. And now we get to the point in the program where we're trying to find these 1% on flyer plays for your large field GPPs, specific stacks if you're trying to get sneaky in your stacks, right? Trying to win the Millie Maker. This guy, so he was limited on Wednesday. He did not practice on Thursday, but he actually spoke to the media on Thursday, and he said that he just had spasms in his calf, and he does not believe that it's anything serious. Of course, Friday's injury report, by the time you're watching this, it's not out yet for me, will say a lot. Hopefully, he's not ruled out by the time this is in. If this man gets ruled out by the time that you're watching this, well, then, just say take care, brush your hair, and I appreciate you all tuning in, and be sure to sign up for Patreon, and be sure to use the code SAL on PrizePicks and take advantage of all the lovely offers while they still last this year over there with that code free bet up to $100. But if he is indeed not ruled out, and even if he's questionable or probable, the Friday injury reports will say a lot there. Desean Jackson at $4,200. There's not a lot of good punt plays this week. People will go back to Josh Reynolds, who's an average receiver with a terrible quarterback and a bad offense, just because they saw him catch a touchdown and get loose on a touchdown on Thanksgiving. So they'll go back to him because he's cheap. Maybe they'll play Laquan Treadwell because he's coming off a career-high 8 targets this late into his NFL career. Again, a bad offense, not great spots overall, but if you want to get there, you want to throw him in a run back, fine. Those are like the only cheap options unless you're punting somewhere else this week. Desean Jackson at $4,200 is a decent cheap option. 10.5 fantasy point projection at, yes, 1% projected ownership, and this questionable status around his calf will likely keep him at 1% ownership. I think he's one of the best leverage plays in the entire slate because he's cheap, because his upside that we just saw last week, and because he's trending in the right direction, right? Since joining this Raiders team where he says he wants to retire, apparently, week 10 is very limited. He came in like a couple days before the game, only ran 4 routes, 18% of the snaps, 1 target, had a catch, ended up fumbling it. Week 11, the snaps nearly doubled to 35%, the routes double from 4 to 8, and he sees 1 to 0 targets, right? But the usage is doubling. The usage is going up. We said that heading into the Thanksgiving week that would make him a good play because of that. And what happens? Week 12, 51% of the snaps, 22 routes, and 4 targets in that big game against Dallas. Now, he was still number 4 in the wide receiver pecking order, right? It went pretty clearly Hunter Renfrow, then Zay Jones, then Bryan Edwards, the second-year player who was banged up his rookie year and hasn't been doing much this year, then Desean Jackson. But Bryan Edwards only ran like 24 routes. So Desean Jackson is slowly taking Bryan Edwards' role, which I'm going to be honest with you. Like, Zay Jones at least looked decent on Thanksgiving, commanding some targets. Bryan Edwards has not done anything. He's not getting separation. It's pretty sad. I know he's this athletic size freak who had good special teams abilities as well at college, which is usually an indicator of your quick twitch, your athleticism. And it's not been the case so far for Bryan Edwards. I'm not sure why, but Desean Jackson is coming for this man's job if he's indeed going to be out there today. Now, look, it's a tougher spot for sure. Like, this Washington secondary ranks 28th in the NFL. It is a 26 team implied total for the Washington football team. But although they rank 28th, if you're looking at the individual matchups here, you probably shouldn't for Desean Jackson, but William Jackson has been playing pretty well. Kyle Fuller has really come on these last 4 or 5 weeks. But here's the thing. When you play Desean Jackson, who's 35 years old still, and still has his 4.35 top 2 percentile in the NFL speed when he came out, right? He still has that speed. That shit don't age yet. When you have that, it's not about the one-on-one matchup. It's just not. Like, last week, he just ran by Trevion Diggs, one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL athleticism-wise. He just ran by these guys. I don't have any issues with him running right by William Jackson, a veteran in the NFL. Sure, good with the Bengals, now playing well with the football team, but I don't think there's any reason he can't just run by them again because, hey, he's faster than him if Derek Carr has the time to throw. And that could be the one big concern this week, is that the Washington football team is generating pressure, even without Sweat, even without Mr. Chase Young out there, right? So they're still generating pressure. Now, that can fall off any week now, but Derek Carr does fold under pressure, and finding the guy downfield is difficult, but you would assume a couple times a game there's going to be opportunities. So if Desean Jackson is healthy and starts playing 60, 65, 70% of the snaps and fully takes Bryan Edwards' role, I mean, he's going to be a $5,000 receiver really quick. This is your 1% on play. You're not putting him in your cash lineup. You're probably not putting him in your single entry lineup unless you're playing a Raiders stack. He is a play that you're trying to leverage the field by getting over the field in a ton of spots, a large field tournament. Whether it is a large field single entry, right? Maybe not your smaller field is what I meant by not putting him in your single entry, or the Millie Maker type contest. That's what you're trying to do there. I mean, for comparison reasons, Laviska Shenault is 4,400. Laviska Shenault had a lot of targets last week, but they were short. They were like at the line of scrimmage. It was like the Rondell Moore role. There's no upside there unless you're scoring touchdowns. So I have Laviska Shenault for 10.8 fantasy points, basically the same fantasy point projection as Desean Jackson, coming in at 5% ownership. So 5 times the ownership for a guy that I would say has absolutely no upside compared to Desean Jackson, because Chenault's not getting downfield targets out of the slot in Jacksonville. So I take Derek Carr over 265.5 passing yards to close up our props for week 13, at least in this video. No Desean Jackson props out there yet. I doubt there even will be. They usually don't put props out there for guys who might be questionable for the week and just guys who are like the wide receiver 4s on their team. But Desean Jackson, I think he's coming up. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 3, if not the wide receiver 2 soon. And look, I mean, him stretching the field not just obviously has the touchdown upside plays, but it creates a threat. It makes the defense have to respect that, right? Which then allows Hunter Renfrow to benefit on the underneath stuff, allows the running backs to have more space on the ground. So over 265.5 passing yards for Derek Carr this week. We hope that the man who folds under pressure a good amount, we hope he gets some time this week. Otherwise, that number is not going to look as good. But I have him in the 280s, so we like it. Over 265.5. You use the code SAL. You get the free bet up to $100. You come on in, you use the tools on Patreon, and you see, oh, my God, this projection's here. I should take that over on PrizePicks. Oh, my God, I should play these guys. These are nice leverage plays. They're low owned with a nice projection compared to guys around them. Here's a couple of them, but there's even more. I mean, this is just 5 guys. If I put up a list right now of like the best leverage plays, this week is the most you'll find. On an 11-game slate, this late into the season, there's so much great leverage opportunities right now. There's probably like 15 to 16 really good plays and like 10 really strong leverage plays. I think we're giving you 5 right here. You can check out on Patreon to see the rest. The secrets, unlock the secrets, put the tools in your toolbox, put it on your backpack, on your back, and go to war with your loaded up rifles while people are going there with their throwing knives. You're going to win. It's as simple as that. You're up on the hill looking down at the competition, right? You're going to win. It's as easy as that. I appreciate you all tuning in so much. Hope you have a lovely rest of your weekend. Sunday we'll be live and we'll be answering your questions. Sunday morning we'll have the Patreon-only GPP Strategy Podcast where I talk about every single one of my exposures, every single player that I'm owning. So be sure to check that out if you're a Patreon member. And we'll see you there. We'll see you when we see you, gang. RateThisPodcast.com/Shal to get entered into a chance to win $100 and for us to try and punch up towards the ESPNs, punch up towards the CBS, and dominate those motherfuckers up there. We're breaking in the little engine that could. I'll see you when I see you, gang, and I'll see you in the next one.